So turn to Matthew chapter 5, grab the paperback Bibles, pass them down. Turn to Matthew chapter 5, page 786, or bust open a Bible app. Feel free to steal one of those Bibles. That's not one of the 10 commandments. Don't take a paperback for momentum. That's not one of the 10 commandments. You can go ahead and take one. So I do want to remind you, this has a PG-11 rating this morning. We're going to talk about some more mature themes, and any of you who have heard me speak for long know that I don't really pull punches when it comes to getting down to the nitty-gritty of a given topic. And so PG-11 rating and all that. So how many of you are fans, by a round of applause, of the Big Bang Theory TV show? Not the actual theory, but the TV show. Okay, so if you're familiar at all with the characters, Shannon and I love that show. One of my favorite episodes is Season 3, Episode 8. Okay, just to get specific. All right, Season 3, Episode 8. So there's the main character, a blonde girl whose name's Penny, and she lives across the hall from three geeks, or a couple of geeks, and one of those geeks' name is Sheldon, and he's kind of the main character of the show, and he's a theoretical physicist who's a genius, and they're friends, and they kind of have this weird but growing friendship over the years and the episodes, but one day Penny slips and hurts herself in her shower. And she starts yelling in her apartment to Sheldon, who's in the next apartment across the hall. And then he hears her, and he shows up at her door, and he says, "Penny, Penny, Penny." And she's like, "Come in." And so he comes in, and he finds another place to knock. And then he comes to the bathroom where she's yelling from, and she says, "If you knock again, I'm going to kill you." So he comes in, and she's in there all wrapped up in the shower curtain. She's fallen in the shower, says she thinks she's dislocated her shoulder, and she needs Sheldon's help. She needs him to help get her dressed and to drive her to the ER. Well, Sheldon doesn't drive, so that's a whole other funny thing. Everyone drives Sheldon places and kind of takes care of him like a little kid, but he doesn't drive people. So eventually, after he explains to her that the reason that she fell is because she doesn't have any adhesive stickers of whimsical ducks on the bottom of her bathtub, they go into her bedroom, and she kind of picks out an outfit, and he holds up the shower curtain, and she basically says, "You got to help me get these clothes on, but don't look. I don't want you to see me naked." And he says, "Okay, well, that makes sense." Now, sidebar, this genius physicist, all that, up to this point in the show, we really don't have much of a clue of, does this guy even like girls? Like, his sex drive is way down here if he has one. And so we're like, if there's anyone you can trust, Penny, with this responsibility, it's Sheldon. So he holds up the shower curtain. She begins getting dressed with what she can do with one arm. And eventually, he says to her, "Well, you may be interested to know that a prohibition against looking is well established in heroic mythology. Lot and his wife in the Bible, Perseus and Medusa in Greek mythology, Orpheus and Eurydice in Greek mythology." And then he goes on to continue. He says, "They always look. It never ends well." And so he finishes holding up the curtain to the point where she has to put a shirt on and really needs his help. So he reaches around and he starts to help her arm to get through the dislocated shoulder, help that get through. And he says, "That doesn't feel like an arm." And she gets real awkward and says, "Because it's not one." And he says, "Oh." And she says, "So why don't we let it go?" Okay? So it gets super awkward, but eventually they get in the car, they're riding to the ER, they're going about 4.2 miles per hour because Sheldon never drives. And as they're driving to the ER, Sheldon says to Penny, he says, "May I ask you a question?" And she says, "Yeah." He says, "Why do you have the Chinese character for soup tattooed on your right buttock?" And she says, "That's not the Chinese character for soup, it's the Chinese character for courage." He says, "No, it's definitely the Chinese character for soup." He's a genius, he knows. And she's like, "Well, wait a minute. How did you know there's a tattoo on my right buttock? Did you look?" And he says, "Sorry, as I told you, the hero always peeks." So when you see this with Sheldon, you're like, oh man, like if there's one dude on earth you could trust, it's Sheldon Cooper, man. Dr. Sheldon Cooper. Like this guy, that's the one guy you think, Penny, you could trust to not look. But even Sheldon looks. Man, is there any hope in the world, women? So this week, we're in a series called Pest Control, last week of our series, and this is about battling destructive little habits that wreck our lives. We might think they're small, but they actually just reap destruction, man. And so things like gluttony and gossip we've talked about. Now we're talking about lust this week. So turn to Matthew chapter 5 in the House Bibles, page 786. just a setup for this, what we're looking at, Matthew 5. Matthew 5 through 7 is called the Sermon on the Mount. And it's one of the most famous sermons Jesus ever preached. He sat on a mountainside, and people, the crowds of Jewish people sat around listening to him preach. And actually, Jesus sat, they all stood. I think we should do that at Momentum from now on. I think it's interesting. I sit down, you guys get to stand for the very short time that I preach. So, Jesus, whether he's trying to or not in the sermon, is really establishing his authority as God in the flesh. He is Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, and the way he's doing that is this. He's kind of going through quoting one of the 10 Commandments at a time and saying, hey, you've heard it said to people long ago, this, for instance, don't commit murder. But I tell you, and he'd add to it, like take it to another level. And so I'm sure many people in the crowd were like, dude, this guy speaks with such authority. But I'm sure there were also people in the crowd, maybe like a couple of you, who are like, who does this guy think he is? Like he's saying, here's a 10 commandment, and then he's saying, but here's what I say about that? Who is this guy, you know? So he's really demonstrating his authority as God in the flesh here to teach you about God's word, which is his word. So if you look at Matthew 5, starting with verse 27, it says this. Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, and he quotes the 7th of the 10 commandments, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So let me break this down. Jesus is not saying that lustful thoughts are identical to lustful deeds, okay? That's extremely clear. Therefore, a person might as well, hey, you know, I thought about it with this person, so I might as well just pursue that. I just might as well go ahead. This person flirted with me, and I entertained that, so I had to just go ahead and go full on have adultery, have an affair with this person, or have sex with my girlfriend because I've thought about it. But he is saying this. Jesus is saying, spiritually speaking, those things are equivalent. They're both missing the mark of the purity that God wants for you in his plan for sex. So God makes it really clear, sex is an awesome thing. It's not like God accidentally invented this thing, and it's like, oh man, they're really enjoying this, these people. So God, created this for the boundaries of within marriage. So what are the boundaries? I really love them. No, that's not the boundary. The boundary is within marriage. We've committed to one another for life, and God's like, this is incredible. I made it pleasurable. I made it good. This is a good thing. But outside of those boundaries, it's destructive. And so it's not like God created the world and first two people, Adam and Eve, and he was like, okay, we'll leave you guys alone. I'm going to go rest for a day. And then he comes back like a day later, and he's walking through the garden. And he's like, Adam, what are you doing? Get off of her. Oh, my goodness. I didn't know those two things went together. Oh, my goodness. That's not how it happened, okay? God created sex. It's not this accident. He's like, oh, man, what did I do? That's not how it happened. But he understands this is a big deal. When you don't go within the boundaries of what I've given to you, there's things about it like, oh, it still feels good or whatever, but you reap spiritual consequences. So to commit adultery, or also to be impure sexually in other ways, like in your mind and that stuff, that they both are missing the mark spiritually. So what Jesus is essentially saying that it is not enough just to maintain physical purity. Okay? I want you to think about that, because the fact is, because Jesus is the one saying this, you're more likely to put your guard up. Because I'm saying this in church, you're more likely to put your guard up. But the truth is, many of you have learned this through your own experience, and you do agree with it because you've learned from your own experience. For instance, you know, just ask the man who's discovered that his wife has been having an emotional affair. He's devastated, and he knows that's still out of bounds. Like, that's still way out of bounds. That's still destructive and devastating. You know, the woman who catches her boyfriend or husband with pornography gets this and says, amen, Jesus. It isn't just about the physical act. It's more than just physical purity. It's stuff that goes on mentally where there is no adultery taking place or fornication taking place. I'll never forget back in about 97, 98, me and my wife Shannon were newlyweds. We just moved to the Washington, D.C. area where I was working at a church called New Life. And the first friends we made there were a couple named Kevin and Nikki. Kevin is 6'7". He's a freaking Viking. He's just like this big old dude. He was a carpenter at that time. But he was like him and Nikki were the main volunteers that led the student ministry. And so he was this guy working a regular job, but student ministry was going on at their house. And they'd come there, middle schoolers and high schoolers, that worship together, then break up into small groups. And we got there, and it wasn't my job to do student ministry, but we love students, so we wanted to volunteer and kind of help them out, even though I was the staff person. It's like, hey, we'll help you and support you in this. Well, we became great friends. We'd stay up late at night playing cards and, hanging out with students sometimes, other times. But I remember, I'll never forget one time we had what we called the Outback conversation. There was an Outback steakhouse right across the street from me and Shannon's condo that we were renting. And we're having food, and somewhere around the blooming onion time, we had this really hardcore, getting real with each other conversation that was not unusual for us. All of us were straight shooters. And so what you have to trust me on right here is that I didn't just say what I'm about to tell you. I didn't just throw this into a conversation. There was a long on-ramp. Other people were talking about the same topic. But I made the comment, I said, here's the deal. It's not unusual for a guy, because guys are visually wired. That's the way that we're made, and this is an excuse, but that's the way that we're made. It's not unusual for a guy to see a beautiful woman walk into a room and think, I wonder what she looks like naked. Or to say, man, I think about her sexually within seconds of seeing her because she's beautiful. That's the way guys are wired. I'm not saying it's okay to do that, but unchecked, without having any self-control, that's where a guy's mind will go if it is not stopped, because they're visual people. And there was this kind of this awkward silence from my newlywed wife, Shannon, and Nikki across the table, who had been married just a little bit longer to Kevin than we had been married. It was awkward silence, and I was like, oh goodness, this is new information to them. And I was like, ain't that right, Kevin? And thank the Lord that Kevin was not Dr. Sheldon Cooper, because Kevin was like, yeah. And he went on to say, I would say for most men, it's not unusual for them to think about sex 100, 200 times a day. And I was like, this is right. Unchecked, this is correct? And I was like, oh, thank the dear Lord that Kevin was here also. Because if this was me having, dinner with a couple of ladies and dropping this tidbit, that they were like, what? And so then there became this awkward moment where we both kind of slowly looked across the table at them, and out with my heart that had sunk into my stomach was coming back up. Now I was like, wait a minute. We both looked at them like, is that way for you too, isn't it, ladies? And they were like, no, and they just immediately on the other end of the issue completely no. Why would we randomly think about some good-looking guy walking into Starbucks and wonder what he looks like naked, or think about sex randomly while I'm working or whatever? And me and Kevin were like, oh, that's funny. We didn't think you were like that. And there was these awkward silence and nervous laughter that I guarantee when that conversation was done, the Outback conversation, all four of us left the conversation so disappointed. Okay? The ladies were really disappointed that sex was so much of an obsession, a distraction, a priority in the minds of men. And here we were saying we're a microcosm of the larger, demographic. We're going to guess 98.6% men are like this, okay? And on the other hand, Kevin and I were disappointed that it wasn't as much of a priority, obsession, or distraction for the women. So one of my assumptions this morning is simply this, is to say men struggle with lust on a different level than women do. We're created more visually, and I'm not saying women don't struggle with lust. I know women who have said they have issues with pornography and different things like that, but it is a different ratio. Okay? There's a different level of men who struggle with this stuff and women. But generally, even though that is a generalization, generally it is true. And so men are wired to be much more visual, so lust is more of a pest. That's not an excuse. It means it's a pest that they have to battle more than women do. So that said, women are just as affected by this topic for many obvious reasons, okay? They're definitely affected by this. So I think this is a great message for both men and women to hear. And to be honest, this might silently be your Outback conversation. Like, wow, Dan, a preacher of the gospel, is also saying this is how, yes, this is how men are wired. And unchecked, this is where their minds will go. A few weeks ago in a sermon, I mentioned that Satan typically tries to attack the mind. You know, like spiritual attacks, spiritual warfare is often mental, psychological warfare. And so sinful thoughts will enter your mind. No matter what your taste buds for sin are, sinful thoughts will enter your mind, whether they're lustful thoughts, whether they're violent thoughts, whether they're anxious thoughts, suicidal thoughts, self-deprecating, self-loathing thoughts, whatever they are, different types of temptations. That's inevitable. You can't stop a thought from popping into your mind, okay? The initial thought, I would say, is the temptation. It's what you do with that thought is really the response to that temptation. Do you choose to act on it, or even to kind of wallow in the thought of hating yourself or being anxious about something you can't control or whatever? Then you're more giving into the sin. It's not just the initial thought. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says this. A Christian leader named Paul says, we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. So I think this is a really cool image that I often use talking about stuff like this, is that a disciple of Jesus, the people that Jesus is speaking to on the mountain that might become his followers, he's saying to them, like, okay, when it comes to lustful thoughts, what you need to do is take them captive. So when something pops into your head that's a lustful thought, for instance, you recognize it, you reject it, and you replace it. Okay? So I recognize, man, that's not something that I need to be dwelling on, thinking about, whether it's anxious, suicidal, lustful. And so I recognize it, I reject it, I'm going to get it out of my mind, and I'm going to replace it with something else. I always tell people, especially talking one-on-one, you just got to find some way to change the channel. Like when the temptation comes, realize it, throw it away, and change the channel. Start thinking about the block or the shot in Game 7 in 2016 in the NBA Finals. Just go to some happy place that is not a spiritual issue that's going to tempt you in some other way. And just be like, okay, here's the place I'm going. I'm changing the channel. So fellas, with lust, lustful thoughts are going to enter your visually wired minds. But it's how you respond to those lustful thoughts. Do you reject them immediately, or do you allow them to stay there and indulge in those thoughts? So I'm going to have my friend PJ Steele come up here for a second. He's going to help me with a quick object lesson. This is DJ PJ. Give it up for him. All right. So this is just a quick, simple illustration to kind of give. So this hat that he has right here is a lustful thought. All right. And so lustful thoughts. You can't help but lustful thoughts, guys, are going to pop in your head. This is what I'm saying you got to do with them. Lustful thought pops in your head, and immediately you're like, oh, whoa, boom, just reject. Like, I get it. I reject it. I recognize it. I reject it. I replace it. So you got to immediately, I'm cutting it off, all right? Okay, but what you can't do, what guys often unchecked do, is the lustful thought comes, you're like, oh, that's a thought. That's a way I'm wired. Okay. Alrighty then. Well, this is going to get awkward. I'm just going to tell you. It's not going to get any better from here. It's going to get more awkward throughout the sermon. But you're like, oh, okay, hey. Oh, me likey. My wife, by the way, hates when I say me likey. So I'm going to say it every service, especially when she's in here. Don't say me likey. It sounds gross. Oh, me likey. Because this is the moment for me likey. No, that's not what you do. What you have to do is, here's the lustful thought. Okay, it's bound to happen. And this is not the sin, is that pops in your mind. And to immediately cut off, be like, boom, no, it's done. I'm like, I got to change the channel. I got to get that out of my mind. That's how you deal with a lustful thought. Give it up for DJ PJ. Ladies and gentlemen, playing his role, his common role as the temptress, PJ Steele. PJ Steele. Yes. Okay, so that's how you deal with a lustful thought. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying that the more you actually put up a fight, it does become easier. It's a discipline that you have to work through. And on that note, unlike Lot's wife mentioned by Sheldon or Perseus or Orpheus, it's not the first look that gets you in trouble. Okay, the first look is what got Orpheus, if you know Greek mythology. That's what got him in trouble because there was a prohibition against looking. It's not the first look that gets you in trouble, guys. It's the second look. And we know that. Okay, this is the thing that maybe wives, your husbands or boyfriends are not courageous enough to tell you, but you can't help seeing people who are attractive to you, okay? There are people in the world, and it's different for everyone. Some people like people who are big, skinny, tall, short. It's different for everyone. But you might see someone and say, that person is attractive to me. The first look doesn't get you in trouble, noticing a guy who's handsome or a woman who's beautiful. It's the second look. Looking back at that person, that's what gets you in trouble. Whether your wife or girlfriend is there or not, that's the spiritual issue, is the second look. I'm going now and I'm taking inventory, okay? That's what the deal is. That's what Jesus mentions in Matthew 5. Anyone who looks at a woman lustfully. You know the difference between looking at a woman and looking at a woman, okay? There's an italics that you know what the crap that italics means, right? There's a look and there's a look, right? Okay, am I right? Okay, so there's a look and then there's a look. Jesus is talking about the dude who looks with the purpose of feeding his inner sensual appetite. Like, I'm going to go back and I'm going to look now. And that's where Jesus is saying, now you're crossing the line. Imagination, guys, God has blessed guys with a different kind of imagination. They're very visual. Imagination is a God-given gift. But if it's fed dirt habitually through the eyes, then your imagination becomes dirty. And it just continues to perpetuate and snowball if you allow that to be unchecked. I grew up mostly with my grandparents when I was first born, 3 days old through second grade. I lived with my grandfather and my grandmother. But in second grade, my mom married a stepdad named Joe. And there was finally a situation where my mom wanted me to come live with her. So I moved in Toledo, Ohio with my mom and my stepdad, Joe. I've told many stories about Joe. Joe didn't like me very much. In his eyes, I was kind of the fruit of someone else's love. So it's kind of this inconvenient situation. He's like, okay, I got a new wife. We got this new thing going on. But this kid comes along with the deal, and this sucks, you know. And that's really the way he looked at it. And he didn't pull any punches about that. Well, my mom was a waitress at Red Lobster for quite a while when I was in third grade, fourth grade, maybe longer. And so she'd be gone often in the evenings. And there was one evening when I was in third grade that my stepdad said, hey, Danny, I want you to come up here for a second. I went upstairs to my mom and stepdad's room. And on the bed, all over the bed, he had books and magazines open of porn. And so there were these books and magazines all over. And I don't remember if they were just pictures or if there's people performing sexual acts in them. I just remember being like, whoa, that's weird. There's naked people all over those pictures. And he started asking me these strange questions that I didn't really understand what he was asking or what they meant. So years later, when I look back, I was like, what a scumbag. I can't believe when he showed me that. He was asking me these creepy questions and stuff. And so I remember just sitting there looking at this stuff being like, that is just very, very weird. And I didn't understand the stuff he was asking me because I was in third grade. So fast forward, when I got to be in middle school, there got to be a time where my stepdad, one evening, sitting on the couch with my mom, the celebrity came on some evening show like Entertainment Tonight. Remember this? And so somebody came on and he was like, hey, Dan, I've got a picture of her in a magazine naked. Do you want to see it? And my mom like elbowed him, was like, Joe, knock it off. That's not funny. And he laughed. He was like, oh, I'm just joking. I'm not going to show him the pictures. But he let me know that there was stuff in his room, more stuff that I didn't know about. He reminded me of the stuff that was in his room. And I realized there was like this accumulating, ongoing, this was like some recent celebrity. So he's got updated material constantly. I would later find out, of course, monthly, that he has updated material in his room. And I was a latchkey kid. So the next day when I came home from school, I found a stash like that. And I realized he had all kinds of pornography stockpiled in his room. And I had a half hour to an hour every day before my stepdad came home to kind of peruse through his pornography. And as I got taller and taller, I eventually got to the point where I could see the top of the entertainment center. And I realized, whoa, there's some VHS tapes up here that have very strange titles. They're like parodies of movies that I would know, but they aren't the movies I would know. And I realized, oh man, he's got videos too. And so by the time I was in high school, I was already highly addicted to pornography. Well, then my best friend Jason invites me to church camp, because this was not a Christian family, if you haven't picked up on that quite yet. So I was invited to church camp, and I was like, sure, I'll go to church camp. I went to church camp, and that was the week that I decided, it was after my freshman year of high school, man, I want to follow Jesus and start reading God's Word, and it was just fired up about my relationship with God, and that's why, again, Wild Side, this camp, another reason stuff is so impactful for kids and made a big difference in my life. But I realized Jesus wanted me to deal with the lust habits and the habits it was setting me up for, even sexually, that I was like, man, God, I know this is something I've got to deal with. Now I follow Jesus, and I know this is wrong, but the problem for me was when I went home is it wasn't my stash to throw away, if that makes sense. Like, my stepdad is stockpiling pornography in his room, and in the summer when I come home from camp, they're working during the days. I don't have school, and I wake up, and I'm like in bed, like, oh, man, I can feel the presence of all the stuff in his room, and I'm trying to fight the temptation to now break this pattern that I've like started and have going for a few years now. And I remember just trying to sleep in as long as I could in the summer so there'd be less time in the workday that I'd have to deal with the temptation of being alone with my stepdad's pornography, but I couldn't throw the stash away because it wasn't even mine, and he would have broke my face if I did. And so here's the deal. I never told anyone, even though now as a Christian, I was like, I don't know if Christian people are allowed to talk about stuff that's this real. And I never told anyone. I also never got caught with anything. And so what happened was I had this growing secret in my life of I'm trying to struggle through this, but I don't know how to win. Like, this is already so much of an addiction and a pattern. I don't know what to do now that I follow Jesus, and I don't think I can tell anyone. And so here's the deal. Secrets are really powerful. They're so powerful, they'll knock the lights out. I mean, that's how powerful they are, okay? Thank you, Joyce. And so secrets are powerful. Secrets wrapped around pornography are very, very powerful. Secrets lead to shame. Shame leads to hiding. Hiding leads to loneliness. Loneliness leads to helplessness. And then helplessness just leads to this feeling of, I'm just quitting the fight. Like, this is just me. It's who I am. I'm a guy. This is what guys do. They think about women this way all the time. This is what they just do. This is who they are. They need a fix. You know, all this kind of stuff. And it just becomes I just give up. I'm not going to put up a fight. I'm not going to fight the battle. And I'm not even trying anymore. So what I want to do is give you like a couple of suggestions of just action steps on how to kind of continue to battle lust. You got the hat thing and the captive. But just some ideas on what it looks like to battle and to put up a fight with lust. There was a guy, his name was Job. He was a godly married man who lived in ancient times. And in Job chapter 31 in the Bible, Job says this. This is very unique. He says, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman. Okay, so this is an interesting word, covenant, because usually the way we know it in culture, about the only way it exists for most people, is the covenant of marriage. And so usually a covenant's made between a person and another person, but God's a part of it too. It's like we're making this agreement, this kind of binding pledge or promise. We're making it, but including God, and it's before God we're making it. I promise to be faithful to you. We will stay together and be faithful to each other till death do us part, is the idea. Well, here you've got a strange situation where Job is saying to his eyes, okay, guys, I'm gonna make a covenant with you. We're not going to look lustfully at women. We're just not going to do that, okay? And we're going to make this covenant, eyes, me and you, that when a woman walks into the room, we're not going to undress her with her eyes. We're not going to think about her as a sexual object. And we're going to make this covenant before God. That's pretty cool, but it's also pretty weird in this culture. So one of the times it's weird is at the queue. You know, there's a timeout, and all of a sudden, girls come running out in sports bras and, you know, bikini bottoms, and they start running out or whatever. Now, you can say whatever you want about the dancers. I know I can't look at dancers. They're just dancing around, and they're, you know, pelvic shaking and all that kind of stuff and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, I just can't look at that. And to be honest, the Cavs girls aren't a big temptation for me, just to be honest. It's more of a discipline, a practice thing of like, my eyes have made a covenant. We're not going to look at that right now. NFL game, we're not going to stare at the cheerleaders. But at the queue, you know what's interesting is when you make a decision not to stare at the girls who are dancing on the floor, it's interesting because what you look around at is a championship banner. I'll look at that for a minute. There's some charity stuff, but that's interesting. I know he was a part of that charity. And you also see thousands of men who are goggling and gawking at the women. That's the thing that you see. And you're almost embarrassed for yourself because you're one of their kind, you know? There's like guys all around you, drool stringing out of their mouths. They're like, grabbing popcorn. And you can see the women, oh, look at that skank out there. She look nasty. You know, they're just like all like, the women are like offended and like, no, yeah, I can't compete with that. She's nasty. I bet her breast stinks. I bet she has halitosis. You know, just, there's all this thing. Women looking mad, men just like, it's just crazy. So the other thing that I see, though, which is pretty cool as I look around and the dancers are doing their thing or whatever, is I see my sons, which is pretty cool. Like, I didn't go into it planning this, but more and more as we go to watch parties, which is the thing we can afford to go to. We go to watch parties, and I'm like, my sons are seeing Dad looking around. They're like, what the crap is Dad looking at? You know, what's Dad doing? But now they're getting older, and they're going to start understanding, and some, you know, one of my sons does understand now. It's like, oh, I get it. And one day I think he's going to look back and be like, man, one thing I always noticed about my dad wasn't just during the queue, but man, my dad didn't look at other women. Like, he didn't stare. I mean, he looked at women, but he didn't look at women. Like, that was different about my dad. And one day I think he's going to realize, I think my dad had a covenant with his eyes before God that he's not going to look lustfully at women. He's going to fight the battle. This is what I'm asking, is the first step is to say, make a decision to start putting up a fight. That's not saying you're going to be 100% pure when you make this covenant with your eyes. Oh, no, that's not what it's going to be. It's to say, I'm going to try and make a covenant with my eyes. It's to say, I'm going to at least try to be in this fight and to say, I'm going to put up a fight to lust. I'm not just going to say, oh, boys will be boys. That's what we do. I'm going to put up a fight. I'm going to make a covenant with my eyes before God. I don't want to look lustfully at women. Anyone who is not my wife, I'm not going to think about them sexually. 2002, there's a guy named Craig Gross, which I think is a very fun name for this sermon. His name's Craig Gross, and he founded an online ministry called XXXchurch.com. It's just what you think. It's XXXchurch.com. And so their mission is to help men and women who are struggling to break secret habits, to crush shame, and create a great life with a healthy view of sex, because sex is a great God-given thing inside the boundaries of marriage, through online community and resources. So the one fun thing is if you go to XXXchurch.com, there is on the homepage a button that says panic button, which I think is hysterical. You know, it's like, I'm alone at work and XXXchurch.com, you know, that kind of thing or whatever. Panic button. And when you hit the panic button, what you do is it asks you for a couple demographic questions. Are you a man or a woman? I'm a man. Are you married or single? I'm married. And then it says, okay, give us your email, and then we're going to give you a link to a 3-part series based on your demographic that's just going to talk you through some quick teachings, 10 minutes long kind of thing for each video. And so for the one for me, being a married man, basically video 1 was, okay, you're a dude who clearly struggles with pornography and lust. Here's how you have a conversation with your wife about this since you're a married man. It's like, what a great thing, you know, to say, I'm just going to coach you through how to just open this conversation up so that your wife isn't having the Outback conversation too far into the future. Like, this needs to happen now. You guys have to understand each other more. And so it's really a cool thing. So these videos are called Recover, like Recover for Men. There's also Recover for Women. I saw a trailer to that 3-part series, which is really cool. It's basically women trying to work through the hurt or the loss of trust or the questions of insecurity that come from finding out your man struggles with pornography. And what's an important thing to say about this woman is this: he doesn't struggle because of you. This is probably something he brought into your relationship. That's the case for me. That's the case with most guys I've ever known who have struggled with lust or pornography. It has nothing to do with the woman. It has everything to do with the problem he brought into the relationship. And so there's a series for women, counseling them through in a 3-part series, which is really powerful. And then there's also Recover Together, which is a video series for him and her to watch together, for the husband and the wife. Now, I think it's one interesting thing is Craig Gross says this. He says, because of the demographics on the panic button, he says, here's one thing that shocked him. 95% of the hits on the panic button come from the wife or spouse. So what that's saying is, just to be very, very honest, is that, dudes, she's panicking about it, but you're not. Like that's what it kind of comes down to. That she's looking for help about this issue, but you're not. And so that's kind of the situation a lot of women are stuck in is, man, we got to figure out answers to this. But from her viewpoint, it looks like you don't even care because you're not taking any action steps forward. So Craig Gross, one of the things he says, what I think is really good, is he says, my confession is this: I can't beat porn alone. It's always a click away, and because of this, I believe in getting help. The secret to beating pornography, even if you think you just dabble, it's just a pest, is take a step. So the first thing is just make a covenant and say, I'm going to be in this battle. I'm going to battle lust. The second thing is that you can't defeat lust or porn by yourself. You need a friend or a community, a Mo group, someone, at least one person that you can confide in to say, this is my struggle. Can you and I have some conversations? You have invitation to ask me any awkward question you want privately at any time to ask how I'm doing and to get into this issue with me. When I was struggling with pornography through late middle school and then high school, into college, Bible college, by the way, into my marriage. But the truth is, the whole time I was like, I want to be free from this, God. I just don't know how. I don't know how I can talk to anyone about this and all this stuff. And so got to be a few years into my marriage with Shannon, and I was working at this church in Washington, D.C. area, and one day there was about to be a panel on stage on Sunday, and I was going to be one person in the panel, and it was early in the morning before church was starting, but we were in a school just like this, and I was in the restroom washing my hands, and all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, I just felt this sense. Now, God doesn't speak to me in audible voices a bunch, like, hey, Dan, 70-foot golden Jesus appears, cracks the clouds open. That's never happened to me. But this morning, more than any other time in my life, I sensed that God was speaking to me in my heart or my mind, because it wasn't a thought I would come up with. And it was this thought: today, you need to confess to someone. And at first, it was just generally, you need to confess this to someone. I was like, what? No, I'm not. There's no way I'm going to tell anybody about this. This has been a secret. I'm going to figure out how to save face and break this habit. So I'm just like washing my hands. And then it was the next level of actually God saying to my heart, you need to tell somebody, and you need to tell somebody today. And then it was like pure panic inside. Like, that feels like an ultimatum. There's only several hours for that. To have a conversation about this, I would need weeks, maybe months to prepare for that conversation, because all I want to do is put this off. And it was just a sense of it's today. And I was like, oh my gosh, now I'm freaking out like all by myself in the bathroom. Like, no, I can't have a conversation about this today. And then the third and the most devastating thought from God was this: if you don't talk to someone about this today, then you are taking a major step in hardening your heart toward me and taking a step away to give me the Heisman, to put me at a distance and keep me at arm's length. That's the decision you're making. And I knew it was true. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is not what I planned on this morning. Getting up in the morning is like, today's going to be the day, I was like, wow. So on the way home from church that day, me and Shannon were riding along with our one or two babies in the back seat and their babies. And I was like, baby, when we get home, I got to talk to you about something. And she was like, what? Because that's always a really scary thing to hear your husband say. What? Is it bad? It's kind of bad. But let's wait till we get home. There's not babies in the car and stuff like that. So we went home. And I for the first time in my life, I started with third grade and all the pornography on the bed for my stepdad, but then I followed it up with all the bad choices I had made in middle school, high school, and the way I let this pattern develop. And I just kind of unpacked it for her, and I broke my wife's heart. I just absolutely devastated her with, here's the truth. Like, the Outback conversation, a call back to that, I really need help figuring out how to manage that. And so I told her, I'm going to make promises. Here we go. I'm going to go find an accountability partner tomorrow, someone I can talk to at least once a week, who will have their phone available at 2 a.m., as I will likewise, to just always take my calls. And I'm going to tell them everything. And what I'll do is I'll tell them all the specifics, all the nitty-gritty details of my struggle. I will only tell you the major things that you want me to tell you. If I trespass, cross certain lines, I will come and tell you that. Is that cool? Give the details to him. That is more than cool. She didn't want the details. So she's like, I can't handle that amount of perversion from your male mind. I was like, okay, cool. So I'll start doing that. And I started meeting with a guy once a week. We had 10 questions we'd work through. Only one of them was about lust, sexual thoughts, that kind of stuff. But that was the one we camped out on the longest. And we would tell everything to each other without pulling any punches. And it was the first time, therapeutically and spiritually speaking, that I did that with someone. And I realized sometimes some of the things that I'm doing and some of the thoughts in my mind, they're so shameful, but I've never had to say them out loud to another human being. And I would be so embarrassed to speak. Sometimes I'd pause for a whole minute and just be like, it's coming, just hold on a second. I just got to think about this for a second. How do you even say this? But this week I had this thought, and I would explain to them, and I'd be like, dang, that is awful. And it was so therapeutic. So for 1 year, we continued to do it after a year, but for 1 year, it was the most therapeutic because then suddenly after about a year, I kind of felt like my level of sexual temptation really plummeted. Like I'm still a red-blooded American male, but because of the fact that I wasn't giving in to every thought and impulse, all of a sudden it went like this. Now here's the analogy I typically give guys, and this is a hopeful analogy, I think. It's this, is when you don't fight the battle, it's just like the Kevin's comment about there's 100, 200 thoughts a day. It's like ADHD. You're like, oh my gosh, there's just like, I have ADHD and I'm trying to read a book, but there's clowns and horns and, just like, man, I can't even concentrate right now. There's so many sexual thoughts and all that kind of stuff. But after this year of working through it and trying to fight the battle and having accountability and full disclosure and confession to a person, it was like what quarterbacks describe when they come in the NFL. They're like, okay, the first year in the NFL, the game, it just moves so fast. They say that all the time. The game just moves so fast in the NFL. It's so much faster than college. You just have this quick window and like, oh man, you're already getting hit by a defensive end. You got to throw to a window. It's so fast. But after year 2, year 3, the game slows down for you. I'm like, man, that was my experience. Like fighting the battle and saying, I'm going to fight the battle. I'm going to do the things that are difficult, that are going to make me lose face and be authentic with people. The game slowed down. And when a thought or a temptation would come my way, I could identify it, I could recognize it, I could reject it, and I could replace it. I could make the choice because I wasn't so overwhelmed by the constant bombardment. So the two things for me were full disclosure to at least one other human being, and then 2, was painfully raw, weekly accountability as long as I needed to do that. Let me kind of head toward landing the plane. My buddy, college professor of mine, mentor of mine, Louis Weber, passed away 2 weeks ago. And he's spoken at Momentum a couple times early on. Just such an incredible speaker, one of the funniest guys you ever meet in the world, and just crazy intelligent, and one of the most encouraging dudes you could ever know. He had a way to make everyone in the room feel special. He's just such a funny guy. He's always joking about his weight. He's like 6'3". He's also like 6'3" wide. If we went anywhere together, we looked like the number 10 walking down the road. It's like, today's Sesame Street is sponsored by the number 10. And so it was just like, he's just such a great speaker. Well, I got to visit him about 6 weeks before he passed away. No idea that he was going to pass away. No sign of that. He had health problems. He was struggling, as you could guess, with type 2 diabetes. And several years ago, he went blind from diabetes. He didn't do, I guess, what was needed to correct that, and he stayed blind. But I guess 3 years ago, he went into a nursing home, and I hadn't known that till recently. I'd even been talking to him on the phone at times. No idea he was being taken care of in a nursing home that he entered into at the age of 51. I was like, man. So I found that out, and next time I was in Toledo, which was, like I said, now about 8 weeks ago, I said, I got to go visit Louis, and I went to visit him, and so he's in there blind, and he's got dialysis going on, but same old Louis. I mean, just the most encouraging, intelligent, so great to hang out with him. Well, during my visit, he asked me, hey, you spent the night in Toledo last night? I said, yeah. He said, where'd you go eat? That's what he wants to know. Where'd you go eat? I was like, I went to Ventura's, this Mexican place. Do you know about Ventura's? He goes, do I know about Ventura's? I've got a membership at Ventura's. And so I was like, okay, because, man, their nachos own me. And they've got these little frozen margaritas that are so delicious. And I told him, I said, alcohol has never, ever been an issue for me. Like, even before I was a Christian, that was never an issue for me. And I said, for me, my issue's always been lust and pornography. And through both of those statements, he was like, yeah, alcohol's never been an issue for me either. I like a good beer, but it's never been. I don't drink to get drunk. And then I said, but lust and pornography, oh, yeah, that's been my struggle too. And then he said, you know what cures an addiction to pornography? I said, what? He said, blindness. And I just lost it. And I was like, Louis, you cracked me up. He was like, there will never be another Louis Weber. I'm just like, man, you broke the mold on that one, God. But that's funny because that is kind of Jesus' conclusion on this point. Is blindness is pretty much the cure for lust. He says this in Matthew 5. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, throw it away. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, this isn't a literal statement from Jesus, okay? Jesus was known for his sense of humor was exaggeration. Here he's speaking in hyperbole. This is deliberate exaggeration to make a point. And the point to his disciples is simply this. You have to deal radically with the destructive pest of lust. You have to deal radically. And so just for an example, if it's a secret, you got to lose face and you got to talk to a Christian dude, at least one, and say, I got to be honest with you and I need accountability. I need someone I can talk to honestly. Maybe it means radical change is I got to downgrade from a smartphone to a flip phone for a year. That sounds radical in the 21st century, but it might be the kind of thing you got to do. It might be saying, I won't watch movies with female nudity in them. I can't. I got to draw the line right there. But you have to deal radically with that destructive pattern. I'll close by saying this. You know, when you're under pressure, you kind of tend towards certain things in your life. And a lot of times it's what your dad did. You know, it's what your mom did. It's parents. It's a script that maybe they handed to you without knowing they were handed to you. So if you were abused by your parents, there's a chance you got to battle through. When you get angry, I got to keep from abusing my kids. You know, if your parents were divorced and there was no good reason for it, then there's going to come a time in your life where your marriage is going to get difficult and you're going to be like, man, I got to fight through just giving up because I feel like my parents gave up early. And so there's all these different things. But here's the cool thing about being a father is that you get an opportunity to be a transition guy. No matter what mistakes you've made in the past, you get an opportunity to say, right now as a father, I can be a transition guy. And when I'm under pressure, I get an opportunity to say, you know what? I'm going to transition right now in my family tree to say, I'm not going to pass this on to my kids. I'm going to get the help that I need to make sure that my sons don't have this script handed to them. What a difference it would have made for me if my stepdad didn't stockpile pornography in his room. To say, I'm going to be a transition guy. I'm going to pass this on to my kids. Be a transition guy and say, you know what? I can choose to write a new story, a new mythology where the hero doesn't look. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for just your grace. Your grace is what stands out to me in this message. Most of all, just the feeling of, man, you were so patient with me at times when I was still trying to save face and I wanted help. I wanted this to be something I had freedom from, but at the same time, you were like, well, you could tell somebody. And you were so patient with me, God, and just the amazing grace that you gave me. I'm the poster child of amazing grace, and it's just laughable that I am a leader in your church. And so, God, thank you. Your grace and forgiveness is the only way that that's helped, that that's happened, and that I came to a point where I eventually would have freedom and separation from a habit and an addiction to lust and pornography. And so, God, thank you for that. I pray that will be reflected in other dudes and that there will be freedom for women in our church, maybe as their boyfriends, husbands, whatever, also have freedom, God. Lift us all up in the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.